At 11:20 UTC on a Tuesday morning in November, 1/5 of the internet stopped working. ChatGPT went dark. Claude, Spotify, Discord, Uber, dark. The engineers on call at Cloudflare thought for 3 hours that they were under attack by a nation-state. They weren't. They were being attacked by their own code, by a single word, in a single Rust file, that had been sitting in production for months, silently wrong, waiting for the right input to finally arrive. Cloudflare sits in front of roughly 20% of all web traffic on Earth. When Cloudflare sneezes, the internet catches a cold. On November 18th, it did more than sneeze. For 3 hours and 10 minutes, the company's core proxy crashed every few milliseconds across every data center on the planet. This is not a story about a hacker. There is no villain, no cable cut, no disgruntled employee, no DDoS. It is a story about a single line of Rust code, a word, 6 letters, unwrap, and how it took down 1/5 of the web. To understand what happened, you need to know 3 things. First, Cloudflare runs a machine learning model called bot management. Every request that comes through their network gets a score, 1 to 99, for how likely it is to be a bot. Millions of customer firewalls depend on this score. Second, the model reads a configuration file called the feature file. It lists around 60 traits the model uses to decide: IP reputation, header patterns, TLS, fingerprints. Every 5 minutes, the feature file gets regenerated from a ClickHouse database and pushed to every machine in Cloudflare's network. Third, the proxy that reads this file is called FL2, written in Rust. Brand new, replacing an older proxy from the Nginx era. And inside FL2, a generous engineer months earlier had written a hard code limit. The feature file could contain at most 200 features, a performance optimization. At the time, the file held 45 features, later 60. The limit was 3 times what anyone would ever need. It was not a safety check, it was a memory allocation hint. Nobody thought of it as dangerous until November 18th. At 11:05 UTC, a database engineer on a completely different team deployed a routine change to ClickHouse, 5 lines of SQL. A permissions tightening, making implicit grants explicit. Good hygiene, the kind of deploy you do on a Tuesday morning before your second coffee. The change was correct. It made the database safer. Code review was routine. Automated tests passed. No alerts fired. But it had one small side effect nobody had anticipated. The query that generated the feature file, the one that had been running fine for months, suddenly started returning twice as many rows. The old permissions had quietly hidden certain metadata. The new permissions exposed it. The query was looking at both the default schema and a hidden replica schema called R0 without knowing it. The feature file, at its next regeneration, doubled in size, from 60 features to 120, still under the 200 limit, still no alarms. Then, 15 minutes later, the next regeneration pushed it over 200. At 11:20 UTC, the bloated file landed on every machine in the network. FL2 opened it, parsed it, hit the limit, and called unwrap on an error. If you've written Rust, you know unwrap is a promise. It says, I am sure this value is good. If it is not, crash the thread. I accept responsibility. It is a word you write when you are certain. The Cloudflare engineer who wrote it was certain. At the time, with a feature file of 60 entries, The assumption held. There was no real-world input that would make the parser return an error. Until there was. At 11:20 UTC, across every Cloudflare data center on the planet, the FL2 worker thread parsed the malformed feature file, received an error, and called unwrap. The thread panicked. The request failed with HTTP. Cloudflare's internal dashboard runs on top of Cloudflare's own network. When FLRL2 crashed, the dashboard crashed. Cloudflare uses its own capture replacement, Turnstile, for login. When Turnstile failed, engineers could not authenticate to the tools they needed to investigate. The thing that broke was also the thing they would have used to fix what broke. So at 11:35 UTC, on the incident call, someone said the first thing that came to mind. We are under attack. The pattern fit. Global. Synchronous. Catastrophic. Nation-state cyber warfare behaves exactly like this. For 90 minutes, Cloudflare's best engineers chased a cyber attack that wasn't there. Only at 1300 UTC, 2 hours in, did someone get workers' KV and access back, bypass the dead front door, and start actually reading logs. At 1424 UTC, they saw the feature file. They stopped the generation pipeline. They rolled back to the previous known good file. At 1430 UTC, FL2 parsed the old file cleanly and stopped panicking. 3 hours and 10 minutes after it started, the internet came back. The post-mortem came out within 12 hours. Matthew Prince, the CEO, wrote it himself on his laptop in Lisbon. He mentioned at one point that he was eating a burrito. The fix was 4 lines of Rust. The unwrap was replaced with a match statement. If the file is larger than the limit, log it. Alert someone. Fall back to the last known good file. Don't crash. 4 lines. To prevent 3 hours of internet outage. To prevent billions of failed requests. To prevent a $250 million headline event. That's it. Here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. The Rust engineer who wrote unwrap was not careless. They were competent. Their assumption was reasonable at the time it was written. The ClickHouse engineer who deployed the permission change did nothing wrong. They made the database safer. Both pieces of code were correct in isolation. Both teams did their jobs well. The bug lived in the gap between them in an assumption that was true on Monday and false on Tuesday, in an input that had never existed until a Tuesday morning permissions cleanup made it exist. This is what we call a latent bug. It is in your codebase right now. Somewhere in your project there is a line that says, I am sure this will not fail. Somewhere there is a constant chosen as a performance hint that will one day become a safety boundary. Somewhere there is a deploy from an unrelated team that will, 5 years from now, change the input just enough to reach the unprotected branch. You cannot grep for it. You cannot unit test it. It will not show up in code review. It is just sitting there, waiting for Tuesday. The question is not whether you have one. The question is whether, when the input finally arrives, your code falls back, or calls, unwrap Cloudflare's bug lived in code. Nobody read. Somewhere in Redmond, at roughly the same time, Microsoft engineers were shipping a feature called Recall, an AI that takes a screenshot of your computer every few seconds. Every message, every password, every banking session, stored on your own hard drive. Plain text. Searchable. They called it a productivity feature. The people who found it called it something else.